Welcome to another episode of the After Dinner Leadership Podcast, where I introduce you to today's guest, Simon Gibson, who's the CEO of Wesley, Clover, and has just finished his term as the High Sheriff of Gwent. For those in America, you might have images of Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham. It's very close. But that role has great significance, and he talks about it in this episode. What a great privilege that is to be able to serve in that position. But one of the main reasons I wanted to speak to Simon was that he had helped to establish a foundation that enables entrepreneurship for young people. And it's called Alacrity, the Alacrity Foundation. And I'm really interested to find out why he set that up, what inspired him to do that, and some of the powerful impact that's had for those people that have participated within it. It's doing some great things across the planet. And then that word alacrity was like, what does that mean? As a bit of a side note, brisk and cheerful readiness. There we go. That's a great word, isn't it, for the day? So I trust that you'll arrive and listen with brisk and cheerful readiness to this episode. And as you take some great nuggets of leadership insight, that you'll be willing to share it and pass it on and repost, do all those great things for other listeners to enjoy. And another warm welcome to a guest, Simon Gibson, who's the Chief Executive of Wesley Clover and the Chairman of Alacrity Foundation. Welcome, Simon. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
And actually, one of my first memories of you goes back to my oldest brother's wedding. You were my oldest brother's best man.
I was.
And I, as a younger kid, I just remember you doing some party tricks, like a disappearing leg and that kind of stuff. And I have to confess, I've pulled that out a few times if I need a quick gig, a quick magic trick.
Was I juggling with raw eggs in those days? That was another.
No, I think it was with apples, and you took a bite out of the apple.
I was eating them while I was juggling them.
Yes,
and I told a story about the Inland Revenue.
I was too young to remember that. I was just too fascinated by the magic tricks. Anyway, it's lovely to have you on the show. And
thank you.
It's our tradition to ask a series of quick fire questions, just about a minute, and short answers are totally fine. Here we go. So who is somebody you look up to?
I think it would be my business partner, Sir Terry Matthews.
What is it about him particularly that you admire?
Oh, he's just the most persistent person you've ever met. I mean, if he was here and we said to him, Terry, what's the secret of your success? Because he's a billionaire, and he's a billionaire with a little bit of a difference, because he's created multiple unicorns, not one, but multiple. Yeah. And he says to people, the three secrets of success are: 1, persistence; 2, persistence; 3, persistence. And that says it all. And I've been in situations with him where, the difference between absolute unbelievable success and what could have been catastrophic failure was down to just hard work and persistence.
Great. What did you want to grow up and become when you were younger?
Oh, easy. Look at this. I wanted to be a helicopter pilot in the Navy. That's what I wanted to do.
And what's one of the best habits you have established?
Every day, getting up and seeing a new day, not being encumbered by what happened in previous days.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I was prescribed as having cancer a few years ago, and I was recently at the doctors, and they said, we see on your record that you had cancer. And I said, I did, but you didn't have counselling. So I said, let me explain. When I had come out of the other end of the cancer incident, I realised every new day was a blessing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I love that. So much wisdom already. What a nice bridge, actually, into what 3 leadership lessons do you wish you'd learned earlier, Simon?
Well, in no particular order.
Sure.
I think it's very important in business that you share ownership and you share success.
Yeah.
The first couple of professional experiences I had were with large corporations, and it was a very hierarchical organization. And when I started, working with Terry, everyone got ownership in the company. Even people that you'd normally associate as not being in management or being movers and shakers. And I remember one of the guys I was living in Canada. It was during the Vietnamese boat crisis. A Vietnamese person had become a refugee, worked for the company and did the gardens. And I remember we were in a meeting and stock options were being allocated, and it was suggested that this person got some stock options, some ownership in the company. And someone challenged that, he's just a gardener. And I remember Terry pointed out, no. When we have visitors to our corporate headquarters, what's the first thing they see? It's the grounds as they drive in, and they were beautiful. And it's first impression, and it's due to that one person. And he got stock, and that stock, by the way, was enough for him to buy a house a couple of years later for cash.
Wonderful. Right.
And, that's one lesson, right?
Life change.
So share reward and share ownership.
Yep.
And one of the other reasons that's a good idea is when things start to get a bit rough, and they always do. Entrepreneurship and building companies is never linear. It's, you're riding a sine wave.
Yeah.
As you go from, success to crisis and success. And that's the way it is when you do a startup. When things are tough and you might have trouble, for instance, with pay, you can't pay what a competitor might pay. But if people have ownership, it's that sticking element that keeps them in the game.
Yeah.
And, when I subsequently did my own startup several years ago, I made sure everybody in the company had shares.
Yeah.
And in 10 years, Simon, there were 200 people in the UK. We had offices in San Francisco and we had offices in Ottawa, but we had 200 people here. How many people left in 10 years? What would you expect?
20%.
2.
Yeah.
Why? Because everyone's rowing in the same direction. Everyone's putting in the same amount of effort to get a success.
Great.
So that's one lesson. And then I would say another lesson I've learned is to share the vision. I've seen a lot of companies where if you were to go in and ask a senior executive, tell me what you do in a tweet, they'll struggle.
Yeah.
Let alone the general workforce. Now, don't you think that's a bit strange? Tell me what you do in a tweet. So you've got now 256 characters to explain what you do. And that's a really good exercise for anyone who's on this podcast to do. Good companies communicate their mission and their objectives regularly in person to every member of staff.
Love it.
It's not something that just a couple of guys in a boardroom understand. And the employees think, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
If they can see the operations of the company with full transparency, people are a lot smarter than they're often given credit for. And again, if it needs special measures to get out of a situation, they'll gladly do it because they understand what they're doing, not being led in the dark. Yeah. So that's another thing, share the vision, tell people where the goalposts are so they know which direction to kick the ball.
Great. What's your third one?
Third one is just an understanding really that it's not about you, that it's always about your customers. Let's look at it in the context of an entrepreneur. What is the most intoxicating substance on earth? I would suggest it's not necessarily fentanyl. It's an idea. And sometimes those ideas are intoxicating to the point of destruction because they might not be such a good idea.
Yeah.
But people won't let go of the idea. We've all seen these people who just they're really persistent with the wrong idea. It's an interesting idea, and you sometimes see it in academia where someone's invented a new process that they think is fantastic. And in many ways it is intriguing, it's interesting, but it has absolutely no market alignment. So from a business perspective, why would you do it? Why would you build this product? Because no one wants to buy it. I learned a lesson a long time ago. It's better to build something you know someone wants to buy than build something you hope someone wants to buy. And the only way you'll get to know whether it's something that someone wants to buy is to ask them. And then shut up long enough to listen to the response.
Yeah, I agree. So how did you get into? So there's a big thread in everything you've said already around entrepreneurship. Actually, first thing, how did you meet Terry Matthews? How did you get that connection and work with him?
Oh, that was a bit of that was a good story, really. I went to Mitel, which is this new Canadian startup. Can you imagine? It's only a few years old, and I mean a few years, and it's already got 40% market share for phone systems in enterprises in Britain. Anyway, I'd done some time in distribution sales, and I moved into marketing. And I had mentioned to the managing director that I couldn't understand what these marketing people were doing. There was 30 of them, and they had no impact on the sales processes, or very little. And I got in a bit of an argument with him, and I said something that I thought he was going to fire me. But fortunately he didn't. He just said, start Monday. And that's what brought me to South Wales, because I moved down here on the back of an argument, basically. But I was to get involved in marketing. So I did that. And I think I did some pretty interesting stuff. And then BT were going to acquire Mitel.
Right.
And I didn't want to go down that route. So I took a contract to work in America for a year.
Yeah.
Just before I left, I got a ring on the doorbell. I looked out of the window, and there was a white Rolls Royce in my driveway. And I thought, who the heck is that? Opened the door, and there's this guy there. He says, I'm Terry Matthews. Do you want to come up the pub? So he took me to the pub, and there were 3 or 4 other guys there. And he said, I've got this idea to create this new startup, and I'd like you to run marketing. And I said, well, Terry, listen, I can't let the people down in the US. I'm only, I'm going in a week's time.
Right.
He said, no, that's fine, because the first year we're just going to do R&D. And then when you are available, the timing's perfect. So that's kind of how it happened.
Amazing. And how did he know you? What was the connection?
I think he'd just seen the work.
Right.
And then, a couple of years later, we're in Canada. I've emigrated to Canada. So I'm in North America now for the 3rd time. And Terry said to me, because we weren't the only people in the data communications business, there were a number of other people ahead of us in the queue with different technologies, but nonetheless, they were big companies too. And Terry said to me, how much would it cost in marketing spend to become the world's #1 supplier? I said to him, I haven't a clue. And he said, well, could you figure it out and then tell me? So I went back a week later, and I gave him a number.
Right.
And when you consider I was 28 years old, he just turned around and said, do it. 18 months later, we were the #1 supplier in the world.
Right.
And by the way, that company, first year sales, 17 million, second year sales, 67 million. We tripped in the 3rd year, only did about 121, I think. Sales ended up being $3.5 billion runway, and the company was sold eventually for $10.8 billion. So
amazing. Great.
But I left after 4 years. I'm not a corporate guy, and I had this big idea that voice and video would traverse the internet, not operate on separate networks. And this is before the web. So, and in the event that it did, the world's largest machine, which would be the telephone network itself, would collapse into the internet. So it'd be the demise of telephone switches that were in every town, and all the circuits. The whole lot would decompose. And when it did, the world would need a new signaling system. So that was my next startup. Create that signaling system.
Right. How did that go?
Well, it was very tough to begin with, because trying to suggest to people that voice or video would ever traverse the internet was difficult because of delays. Do you remember watching video and it would freeze and then freeze?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or we'd have a voice conversation and that's because the packets are getting lost in the network.
Yeah.
But the web's just about, I think Tim Berners-Lee had published his definition for the web. And we had this idea that, look, if you could put voice, video, or data into a session and just send it across the network, it's like agnostic. And, you can sort out the other end what it's going to connect with, whether it's a video conference, a phone, or whatever. So teamed up with a professor in Columbia University, and it became SIP. So this is being controlled by SIP. Your mobile phone is controlled by SIP. Teams is controlled by SIP. But it was really interesting to watch sort of a small group of less than sort of half a dozen people start creating a standard that then becomes a global standard and is used everywhere.
Brilliant.
Great. So that's
success stories. I mean, it's great.
Sounds easy, doesn't it? But trust me, it's hard. It's hard.
Absolutely. I would really love to find out a bit about your chairmanship of the Alacrity Foundation. So first of all, could you explain what it is? What is
so
Alacrity?
The Alacrity Foundation is it operates around the globe. I set it up with a gentleman called Owen Matthews, with some support from Terry. And the idea was that we would take kind of the brightest and best young graduates and give them a postgraduate education. So think of it like an applied MBA.
Yeah.
But they're paid. They don't rack up more debt. But what we would do is we would turn it into a challenge curriculum. So they are really not, it's quite unique in as much as no one needs to come to our incubation program with an idea. Of course, most incubators work on the fact someone's going to turn up and say, I've got this idea, will you back me?
Yes.
Well, we've already talked about how intoxicating and bad some of those ideas are. Yeah. For every one good one, you've probably got to wade through 99 bad ones. But by going out to the public and private sector and sitting down at a C-level with executives, and this is us older guys, not just the graduates, and say to people, and this is really intriguing because you wonder how many corporates don't do this. And we simply say, what do you need? What's killing you? And I went to one of the largest telephone companies in the world and asked that question, mobile operators in the world, and asked that question. And their response was, no one ever asks us that question.
Yeah.
We need some time to consider this and we'll get back to you. And when they came back to me, they had 50 challenges.
Yeah.
Some of those were beyond the capability of a graduate team, but some of them weren't.
So you put that down as a challenge for them to solve.
Then they go into the ideation phase.
Yeah.
They build a solution. And then at the end of that, we pop back to the challenge partner and say, here's our idea. If we were to build this, will you buy it? Or will you distribute it? In that way, you're producing companies that are built to order.
Yes.
Not going through all the production process and then suddenly discover it's not quite what the company wants, the customer wants. And so it's quite a different model, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. When you say you operate this globally, in what ways do the cohort engage? Do they work cross national boundaries, or are they working together in their squads?
Well, typically they start off in jurisdictions.
Yeah.
So there's Alacrity centers here, there's one in France, there's one in Turkey, there's one in Mexico, and there's one in Canada on the West Coast. Yeah. Often we'll work with each other on ideas, but typically you just for the convenience and the intimacy of what you need for the partnership.
Yeah.
It helps if you're in the same geography in the same time zone.
Sure. Great. How many years has the
10.
foundation been established? 10. What have you noticed in terms of impact on the participants of the foundation, not the challenge partners?
Win, lose or draw, they come out with a maturity that's probably 10 years ahead of where they would have otherwise been professionally.
Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine, they understand the ideation process, the commercialization process. They've built business plans. They've had a go at building products. They don't all succeed. But even if they don't succeed, if they move into the corporate world, people who hire them go, these people are like unbelievably good.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really exciting.
Because it's applied learning, not just theoretical learning. And, if you do an MBA, as you know, you'll probably spend most of your time in case studies.
Yeah.
With this, you are the case study, which is far more impactful. And
I agree.
you learn in the school of hard knocks.
Yeah. And how did you start that?
That's a very good question. I was watching the demise of the British technology industry. And I mean the total and utter meltdown of the British tech industry. It's very sad to say that.
Mm.
And it's best typified by a conversation I had in the House of Lords. So I met with the then Perm Sec, and I said to him, I was chasing him for funding support because I'm trying to start this thing. I want to start this thing to take a new generation of young people and try and rebuild the British technology base. That's what I want to do. That's the goal. So I meet this chap and I say to him that I need, are you going to help me? Are you going to provide some funding for this? I had it all worked out, I had all the presentations that he needed and everything else. And he said to me, in frustration, I think, as much as anything else, he said, "You really are the most persistent prick I've ever met."
Right.
But I took that as a compliment, of course. And he said to me, "Why are you so insistent on getting this thing done?" Because I'd been at him for probably 18 months.
Yeah.
Now, normal people just give up. After 18 months, it's like, you get the message. But I kept at him. And I said to him, "I'm going to answer your question with 2 questions and an observation. My first question is, name a British computer company." And I pointed out that we invented the science. Long silence.
Yeah.
Second question. I said, "Would you name a British telecommunication network equipment supplier?" And then I pointed out when I left school, I could have worked for Plessey, Marconi, big Chelmsford companies,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
GEC, Ferranti, STC, Raycall, ICL, all gone. So my supplementary question to him was, is it the British government's intention to just buy all their telecom equipment from China? Little did I know how prophetic that was going to prove to be.
Sure.
With the situation with Huawei.
Yeah.
That's all I need to really say to why I did it, why we did it. It's as simple as that, And eventually I did get some funding, and Alacrity historically has been modelled on a 50% grant-funded basis and 50% philanthropy.
Right. Brilliant.
It's changed its model now because we're able to deliver services which create revenue for the foundation. But
sure,
that was the basis of it originally.
What's your hope for it as you look ahead? Where do you see Alacrity going?
Well, if I was Prime Minister for the day, I would make sure there was an Alacrity Centre adjacent to, but not part of, every major university in Britain.
Yeah.
We spend an awful lot of money in research, as you know. I suppose it's manifest by the fact that the funding councils get 10 times more than Innovate UK, whose job it is to commercialise it.
Yeah.
I saw some figures that said, it was, I know they vary, but it's somewhere between 3 and 8% of all that research ever creates any wealth. Yeah. Well, one way of solving that is to get young people focused on that. We're working on an interesting project currently with the Fulbright Scholarship Scheme internationally.
Okay.
Where Fulbright want to offer better commercialization opportunities to their scholars. Got an interesting piece of insight the other day. They said for every Fulbright scholar that wants to continue their research, there's 3 that would like to commercialize it. Now that's a change from the past.
Wow. I mean, all of this is kicking off a whole series of questions. I guess underlining some of the points that you've just made around Alacrity is like just maybe some sense that the British view of teaching business or arriving at business may have some dysfunction associated with it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You'd expect me to, and I do.
Would you share them?
I mean, at a very almost flippant level, what are 3 things that you must have to succeed in business? 1 is you need to know how to count. If you can't count and keep the score, you're not going to be in business very long.
Yeah.
Are the universities good at teaching that? Absolutely. There's business and accounting courses in every business school, in every university that's got a business school.
Yeah.
Second most important attribute that you must have in business is the ability to sell. Because if you don't sell anything, you won't be in business very long.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you the question. What universities seriously have courses on selling?
Zero.
Zero. It's very strange. It's almost as if it's a dirty thing that people are expected to go and learn on a car lot.
Yeah.
And in the modern age, that's just ridiculous. Sales is a very complicated process, worthy of academic rigor. It's very similar. You could look at marketing, for instance, in a lot of universities are still teaching the old 4 Ps of marketing: price, place, promotion, and product. And there's very little understanding of digital customer acquisition.
Yeah.
So that whole sort of sales marketing piece, I think, is way adrift of what you need to equip people to succeed in business. And then I suppose the third one is you need to know how to inspire.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit more tricky, isn't it? Because you recognize it when you see it, but sometimes it comes in all shapes and sizes.
Yes.
So I can think of 2 instances. Think of Gandhi and Reagan.
Yeah.
2 great leaders in their own ways, both effectively liberated nations. Gandhi liberated India and Reagan liberated the Soviet bloc. They're the 3 things: count, sell, and inspire.
Love it. So what we're saying is that we've put all our, perhaps Britain's put all its emphasis on the counting point, probably because it's a little bit easier to measure, frankly.
And by the way, we have a over-reliance in our economy on London and the City of London.
Yes.
Which is all about counting.
Yes. Yeah. But we're lacking in the selling and the inspire space.
I believe so.
Good. I like it. It's a good point. I guess off the inspiration piece, I know like you will have sat through many pitches, and certainly you've hinted at having to make some of your own as well. Like, what's the connected with the selling and inspiring piece? Some thoughts around the communications in the entrepreneurship space, because that might be slightly different from communicating in other contexts. What counsel would you give?
Okay, first of all, I'll answer the questions slightly differently. I'll add a bit on the front, then I'll answer specifically your question. So a lot of people come to me and say, you've seen a lot of companies start, so, you've had 150 in your portfolio, plus looking at your own experience. What's the secret of success? In fact, Kim Clark, do you remember Dr. Kim Clark at
I do.
Harvard? He asked me the very question, right? And I think Kim was hoping to get a spreadsheet or some magic mathematical model that I could share with him. And I said to him, you're going to be disappointed, because in my opinion, it's a sensory perception. Head, heart, gut.
Yeah.
My head tells me about the idea and whether it's good or not. My heart tells me about the people. And my gut tells me about the marketplace. If all those 3 things align, bingo, keep talking. There's one of them that I've learned from experience can be out of alignment. So I'd ask you, which one do you think that is?
I would say, I was going to say heart first of all, but then that's not.
No, it's idea.
No. Okay.
Because some people come, they're really fantastic people. They've got a great understanding of their market, but the idea is just a bit wonky.
Sure.
So by getting them to just adjust that idea or come up with another idea, you're laughing.
Yes.
Where you're in the time that you've got, it's very unlikely you can change the people. And unless you're very, very lucky and you're carving out a new industry like Google did, or like, the AI guys are doing in the very early days, you can't move a market. The market is fixed and you're going to go after that particular marketplace.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the head, heart and gut. But on the communications front, so hopefully that's simplified how you pick a winner.
Great.
What I see time and time again, and what I encourage people to do, is understand the words of Leonardo da Vinci, which was simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. If it's not written, obviously it's not read. If it's not spoken, it's never heard. But how you do it is critical. And it needs to be a very simplified narrative in the modern age. It's almost as if people's appetite to consume detail is getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
And you need to be creative. So in terms of creating a pitch, it needs to be concise. The plans need to be readable. You need to have clearly articulated numbers. Let me give you a simple idea in my past about creativity. And I teach this often. I've got a module at university that I teach, and I use this story in that module. So if any of your readers have heard me say it before, I don't apologize, because out of that whole lecture, I bet you this story is the one thing that they remember of that lecture.
Sure.
Not any of the statistics that I give them. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm living in Canada, and we're in the process of doing an IPO. So we're listing the company on the North American Stock Exchange. And you can't imagine how much documentation that is. I remember in the closing meeting, there were 16 tabletops of documentation. Wow. And it was my job to work on the prospectus. So I'm writing the prospectus, and you've got a lawyer over your shoulder saying, you can't write that. And you say, well, what can I write? And they say, it's not my job to tell you what you can write. It's my job's to tell you what you can't write. And you're just getting so frustrated. Anyway, that's a long process, and I've abandoned my in-tray for a few weeks because I've got to concentrate on this. And I get a call from reception, and the receptionists are desperate for me to come down and receive a parcel. And I'm saying to them, look, I'm not expecting a parcel, and I'm really busy. And they say, you've got to come down. You've got to come down. And they just kept on and on and on and on. And I said, what's the big deal? They said, it's beautiful. You must come down. So I went out the atrium area, went down into the reception, and there before me was a beautifully wrapped metallic red parcel. And it would have been about, 3.5 feet high.
Yeah.
Probably 20 inches depth and breadth. And I'm thinking, and by the way, it's wrapped in a beautiful metallic gold bow. And I'm thinking, what on earth is this? So I open it up, and it's a bird cage. And in the bird cage is a dead parrot. Sorry, that's Monty Python. It's a dead pigeon.
Right.
And it's a plastic decoy pigeon.
Yeah.
And it's upside down, like the Monty Python sketch, on the perch with its little plastic stumps. And on one of the stumps is a capsule. So I lean in and I open this capsule, and there's a piece of paper in there. And this is what it said. It said, I've written to you, I've emailed you, I've rung you, I've faxed you, and my carrier pigeon has even died trying to get through to you. What does it take to get an interview? What we were doing at the time, we were trying to hire a creative director. I went straight back to my office, and that guy was hired within 10 minutes. Here's what was really interesting. When he gave me his CV, he had worked for some of the best companies in the world and had worked on iconic ad campaigns, like the ones at Saatchi and J. Walter Thompson, that have gone down in history. But the genius of it is he doesn't send me a 4-page boasting CV about how brilliant he is. He demonstrated it with a dead pigeon in a parrot cage. It's just genius. And by the way, the best CV I've ever received in my life, bar none.
Oh, I love it. Thanks for sharing that. Well, there's so many things that we've covered in that conversation, and I'm grateful for you sharing the lessons that you've learned, and also the wonderful insights in terms of entrepreneurship. And I'm delighted that you were able to get the Alacrity Foundation established and that it's doing such good. Sometimes as we share stuff out loud or reminded of things, we get our own lessons and learnings. What's been a takeaway for you from this conversation?
It's difficult. It's not easy. It makes me reminisce of how challenging the whole journey is. I mean, it always sounds easy because people always talk about the good things and the successes. But, there's an old saying, isn't it? You wade through failure to find success.
Yeah.
But you fail when you stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
But the thing is, the most important thing, Simon, is if you're going to do this stuff, if you want to be an entrepreneur, have fun, be persistent, be honest, and you can change the world even just a small bit if you're successful.
Yeah. I love that. I had a lovely compliment many years ago. Jaguar Land Rover was a prospective client that I was targeted for some time. We finally got some business with them, and the contact there described me as pleasantly persistent. Linking those two things, it's like so having fun. The kind of the selling piece is a really good point. Is that like that persistence really does pay off. I think so. But the right idea, persistence with the right idea, is a takeaway for me from today.
Well, good.
Just
and
thanks so much.
And ask, isn't it?
Yes.
People need to ask. They need to ask for help, and they need to ask for the business. But ask.
Yeah.
It won't come and land in your lap. You've got to be a bit more proactive.
Great. Well, I wish you continued success, and really delighted to have had this conversation. I look forward to the next one, whether it's on this or just informally, socially.
I'd love to do that, Simon, and I'd also encourage those who are considering a path of entrepreneurship to do it. It's much more fun to create your own job than be dovetailed into someone else's job.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thanks, Simon. If anyone wants to make contact, what's the best way that they do that?
Simon@wesleyclover.com.
Super. It's been a delight. Thank you so much. Learned so much.
Thank you, Simon. Lovely to see you.
Yeah. Speak soon.
Take care.
Our after dinner leadership conversation is finished. Our guest has left, and you're still here. Now, of course, you're very welcome. I'm glad that you found the conversation to be engaging. There's a few things that I'd like to ask you to do before you do leave. The first one of those is, if you can stop and think about somebody who you think would enjoy this conversation, a friend, a colleague, perhaps an aspiring leader. The second thing is to stop and hit subscribe or follow. And then the third thing is to start doing something. Perhaps there's a little idea or a concept that we've been discussing today that you think you could apply even a little bit tomorrow, tonight, and to put it into action. I encourage you to use this as a catalyst to do something different, do something more interesting, do something more exciting. And thank you so much for joining us. And please tune in again for another after dinner leadership conversation. You can leave now. I need to go and do the dishes.